I thought the waves were just waves, until one night, something beneath them called my name. Encounter 1. The figure on the tide line. I spent a week on Faroe, one of the quieter Faroe Islands. Quiet in a way that almost feels intentional. It's the kind of place where the wind doesn't whistle so much as murmur, and the cliffs rise like frozen waves themselves, dark and jagged against a sea that never stops battering the earth. The cabin I rented leaned slightly toward the water, as if years of storms had nudged it millimeter by millimeter until it finally accepted the tilt as part of its personality. It wasn't luxurious, but the small fireplace, the wooden floorboards that groaned under every step, and the salty air leaking through the windows felt honest. I'd come to escape noise, and instead found an island that felt like it was listening. On the first 2 nights, I noticed things that were strange only in hindsight. The way the sheep on the hillside stayed far from the shoreline even when the grass was thicker near the water. The way the gulls circled certain sections of the cliff but never landed. The way the wind seemed to push me back whenever I tried walking the path after sunset. But none of that prepared me for the third night. I don't know what woke me. My dreams had been a shapeless mess of fog and distant sea spray, but nothing concrete. And yet, I snapped awake so suddenly that my heart was already racing before I even fully opened my eyes. The cabin was dark, save for the faint gray glow of the moon through the curtains. The wind had died completely, leaving the world unsettlingly still. That stillness dragged me out of bed. I padded barefoot to the window overlooking the shore. The glass was icy beneath my fingertips. Outside, the beach was bathed in pale moonlight, the kind of cold light that makes everything look older, or maybe truer. And that's when I saw it, the figure standing at the water's edge. It looked human from a distance, tall, motionless, facing the sea. For a full minute, I simply watched, half asleep and half convinced it was a trick of the light. But then a wave rolled up around the figure's legs and retreated, and the silhouette didn't sway, didn't react, didn't show even the smallest sign of being affected by the icy water crashing against it. I squinted. Its posture was wrong, too straight, too rigid. I pressed my forehead to the cold window, trying to see more. The moon slid from behind a thin cloud, brightening the shoreline just slightly, and the figure's head turned, not fully toward me, just enough that I knew it had noticed the movement, that it had noticed me. I stumbled backward reflexively, bumping into the wooden table behind me. The sudden motion gave me just enough adrenaline to consider the possibility that someone was out there who needed help, someone stranded or hurt. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the cabin door and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a slap, the kind of cold that stings the inside of your nose and burrows immediately into your bones. The night air carried the smell of wet stone and salt, and the crashing waves sounded louder, almost angry. I took one step onto the porch, then another. The wood creaked under my weight. The figure was still there in the moonlight, facing the shoreline again, as if it hadn't noticed I had come outside. "Hello?" I called out, my voice much weaker than intended. The figure didn't respond. Instead, a wave rolled in, higher than the last, striking it in the chest. Water exploded upward, drenching the shape completely. And when the spray fell back, the figure's outline had changed, not drastically, but enough that I felt the hairs on the back of my neck lift. Its arms hung longer, its head slouched forward slightly, its proportions felt stretched, as if the water had revealed seams hidden beneath the surface. Something moved beneath its silhouette, or rippling, like shifting masses. I froze. The air around me thickened, and then I made a mistake. I stepped off the porch. The figure twisted, turning toward me with a sudden, sharp jerk that looked anything but human. The moonlight struck its face, and I realized it wasn't a face at all. Long, wet strips of seaweed clung to a vaguely skull-like structure beneath, swaying with the breeze. Something shifted inside the kelp, a ripple, like fish swimming under a tarp. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Just the illusion of a face held together by layers of living seaweed. It raised its arm. The hand was a mass of knotted kelp strands dripping salt water. It took a step toward me, not a natural step, more like its entire body was being pulled forward by a rope someone else was tugging. A deep sound, like something exhaling water, rolled across the beach. My stomach dropped. I backed up, stumbling blindly toward the cabin, hands shaking so badly the door handle felt slippery. I managed to get inside and slammed the door shut just as the wind picked up violently, howling against the frame. For a long time, I just stood there, breathing hard, listening. No footsteps, no voice, no movement, just the relentless crash of waves. Eventually, I forced myself to look out the window one last time. The shoreline was empty. In the morning, fog covered most of the beach. But as I stepped outside, my foot landed in something that made me halt instantly. A footprint, deep, water-filled, far larger than mine. And behind it, another, and another. 3 footprints leading from the tide line toward my cabin, and stopping just 2 feet from the bottom step, as if something had come right up to the doorstep, watched, waited, and then slipped silently back into the sea. Encounter 2. The Diver in the Broken Mask. My Uncle Jonas isn't easily rattled. He's been diving the waters between Cunoi and Faroe for almost 20 years, working maintenance on the submarine cables that connect the islands. He grew up on fishing boats, learning early that fear is something you acknowledge without letting it control you. I've seen him walk calmly across a deck during storms that had me clinging to railings, laughing at my wide-eyed panic. But the night he told me this story, if you can call the way he whispered it a story, he looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Like the sea had finally shown him something he couldn't rationalize. It began on a clear morning, the water calm, the sky empty except for a few low clouds drifting lazily over the peaks. His task was simple: inspect a section of cabling that had been malfunctioning. Something about intermittent signal loss. It happens often enough that it didn't raise concern. Barnacles, sediment, shifting currents, they all play their part. Jonas slipped into the water, cold even through his suit, and descended along the rope toward the deeper shelf. The light thinned quickly, replaced by a murky blue that felt both vast and claustrophobic. He set the silence down that was heavier than usual. By the time he reached the cable, around 35 meters down, the world around him had collapsed into the narrow cone of his dive light. Kelp waved like slow arms, swaying with a rhythm that didn't quite match the current. A school of small silver fish darted past, scattering as though startled by something farther below. He knelt by the cable and began checking for damage, scrapes, fraying, any sign of shifting rock. Everything seemed normal, just another day's work. Then he heard the scream. It didn't come through his headphones. It didn't come through the water either. It came through the metal cable under his hand, vibrating up through his glove, up his arm, straight into his bones. A long, sharp cry. Human. Desperate. He froze. At that depth, sound travels strangely, bending and warping until everything feels unreal. But this wasn't distortion. This was too clear. He put his hand on the cable again. The scream came a second time, louder, pulsing like something trapped inside the metal was begging to be let out. Jonas drew in a sharp breath, trying to ground himself. He scanned the water around him, being drifting through the dark, but nothing moved except the kelp. He wanted to surface right then, but protocol forced him to stay a little longer. He needed to at least confirm the integrity of the line. He followed the cable down the slope toward the trench, one of the deeper fissures that drop into a part of the sea most locals prefer not to talk about. They call it the cold road, not because of temperature, but because, legend says, the currents there carry things from elsewhere, things that don't belong in Faroese waters. The scream stopped when he reached the edge. He hovered there, staring down into the black mouth of the trench. His light didn't reach the bottom. Nothing ever does. Then a shape rose from the darkness. At first he thought it was another diver. It had a human outline, a torso, arms, legs, but it moved wrong, too smoothly, too steadily. No fin kicks, no motion of limbs, just floating upward like gravity had been switched off. As it approached the beam of his light, he saw that the wetsuit was torn in several places, long strips peeling like wet paper. Barnacles clung to the fabric, seaweed wrapped around the limbs. The dive mask was cracked down the middle, the glass shattered inward. Behind it was a face, or the vague suggestion of one, but too obscured to make out. He thought maybe the diver was unconscious, or dead, caught in a current. He reached out cautiously, intending to grab the shoulder and check for signs of life. The figure twitched, not a human twitch, something much sharper, like a marionette jerk-tugged by invisible hands. Its limbs bent, not at the joints, but in unnatural places. Its arms folded inward, the legs curled in on themselves like kelp tightening around a rock. Then it turned its head toward him, and what he saw behind the broken mask wasn't a person. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just smooth, dark skin stretched tightly like something had molded itself into the rough shape of a face, but hadn't bothered with the details. Something pressed outward from under the skin, like a hand or a small creature pushing against the inside of a balloon. He tried to kick backward. His fin struck a rock, and then he heard the voice. It came from the broken mask, soft, flat, mimicking a human cadence, but not the emotion. "Help me." Jonas felt something coil around his ankle. Panic surged through him. He kicked wildly, twisting to aim his light downward. Nothing was there, but the pull remained. He wrenched his leg free and shot upward, ignoring every safe ascent protocol he had ever drilled into his muscle memory. He risked embolism, decompression sickness. He didn't care. He needed air. He needed light. That voice followed him, not in the water, not in his headphones, inside his skull. "Help me, help me, help me." He burst through the surface and screamed until the crew hauled him onto the boat. His hands shook so badly that they had to remove his gear for him. The doctor blamed panic-induced hallucination. The diving supervisor blamed nitrogen narcosis. The crew pretended to agree, because nobody wanted to consider any other explanation. But when Jonas showed me his wetsuit afterwards, I understood why he didn't believe any of them. On the back of the suit, running from shoulder to hip, were long impressions pressed deep into the fabric. 5 of them, like fingers, but spaced too far apart to belong to any human hand. Jonas hasn't returned to that trench since. And when he tells the story, he never talks about what he heard on the cable again. Only what rose from the dark. Only what tried to speak with a voice it didn't understand. Encounter 3. The Rainkeeper of Calsoy. If you've never been to Calsoy, There's something you need to understand before the story makes sense at all. The island doesn't feel deserted. It feels observant. The cliffs rise straight out of the water like colossal stone sentinels, and the wind there doesn't just whistle. It travels. It carries voices, half-formed thoughts, reminders that you're not the only thing alive on the island, even if you don't see another soul for hours. I didn't intend to hike the cliff path that day. The forecast insisted on clear weather, but forecasts in the Faroes are more like optimistic suggestions. By mid-afternoon, gray clouds churned in from the west, piling on top of each other like bruises. I should have turned back. Anyone sensible would have. But the path toward the lighthouse was only another kilometer, and I'd convinced myself I could outrun the weather. Halfway there, the rain struck. Hard, stinging needles of water that flattened my hair against my face and soaked my jacket in seconds. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The cliffs beside me blurred. The drop-off into the sea became terrifically abstract, more an instinctual danger than a visible one. The path narrowed, and each step felt like a negotiation with gravity. At first, the storm sounded like any other. Wind and water, the occasional distant boom when a wave struck the rocks below. But then, something shifted. The rain slowed. Not stopped, just slowed, like someone had turned down its speed. The drops no longer lashed. They drifted, floated, hung in the air in a way that didn't make physical sense. I looked up, expecting the wind to have died down, but the clouds were still roiling overhead. Everything around me had gone quiet. No waves, no wind, no gulls, no thunder, just a thick, unnatural hush. I wiped my face and blinked the water from my eyes. That's when I noticed a shape standing ahead of me on the path. Tall, thin, leaning slightly forward, as though the storm itself had formed into a person. At first I thought it was another hiker caught in the weather, someone who had stopped to rest or maybe to turn back. But the longer I looked, the less human it seemed. Its edges were wrong, too soft and shifting. Rain didn't strike it. Rain flowed from it, sliding down its surface as if it were a slope or a carved shape rather than a person. The figure's skin was the color of wet stone, but it seemed to ripple beneath the surface as the suspended raindrops slid over it, not pulsating like flesh, more like currents moving through water. The drops around it froze midair. One hovered inches from its shoulder. Another rolled off its arm and stopped halfway down. I couldn't move. My body understood something my brain didn't yet, that I was looking at something old, something elemental, something that didn't fully exist in any one moment. The figure tilted its head as if listening. A low voice vibrated through the air. Not booming, not loud, just deep, deep enough to feel in your ribs. It spoke Faroese, but the words felt strained, unfamiliar in its mouth. You walk where the drowned are remembered. The phrase struck something instinctual. I didn't understand the meaning, but I understood the warning woven inside it. I didn't mean to intrude. I managed, my voice trembling in the suspended air. The figure stepped closer. As it moved, the rain followed its motion. Drops that had been hovering drifted toward it in spirals, drawn in like moths to heat. When it raised an arm, the drops tangled together into thin streams, tracing patterns I didn't recognize. Circles within circles, spirals intersecting lines, shapes that felt older than written language. Storms keep memory, it said, but storms forget nothing. A gust of wind surged behind me, pushing me forward. The cliff groaned under the force. For a moment, fear tightened around my throat. I was keenly aware how easy it would be to fall, to vanish into the churning sea below without ever being found. The figure turned its head toward the cliff's edge. The rain rings around it trembled. "This place is not for you." Its voice held no anger, but it was not a suggestion. My legs finally obeyed the panic building in my chest. I took a step back, then another. The figure didn't move. It simply watched, observed, a living storm holding shape. The moment I turned away, the suspended raindrops fell all at once, pattering against my jacket and hood. The wind roared back, nearly knocking me off balance. Sound rushed in like a crashing wave. The ocean thundered below, gulls cried above, and the storm resumed with violent fury. I stumbled along the cliff path, soaked and shivering. Every few steps I glanced back through the rain, half expecting to see the figure behind me, but it was gone. The path was empty. Only rain and fog remained. When I reached the lighthouse, a local keeper was waiting under the shelter, clearly amused by the soaked outsiders sprinting out of the storm. He asked if I'd gotten caught by the shift, their word for sudden weather changes. I tried to explain what I'd seen. His smile faded instantly. He didn't laugh. He didn't scoff. He only nodded, solemn and slow. "There are old things in our storms," he said. "Not gods, not spirits, just old. Older than the cliffs, older than the sea." He paused and met my eyes, and they do not like to be surprised. He didn't let me walk back alone, and I didn't argue.